Back in August of 1962, a character that would change the very definition of what a superhero can be debuted from Marvel Comics. Inspired by Stan Lee's weird fascination with a fly on his wall, Marvel released a book that featured the introduction of Spider-Man. Today, we take a look at Spider-Man's 60-plus year tale featuring an amazing array of villains and iconic stories. Stay tuned. Hey guys, my name is DJ, and the long and winding history of Peter Parker has showcased some of the most fascinating things to come out of Marvel Comics. We've seen him go through some of the most heartbreaking events in comic book history, we've seen him overcome the toughest of obstacles with his pure strength and determination, and we've even seen him battle across the multiverse in an epic war for attrition. So combine some of the most riveting stories ever, some of the most interesting villains ever, and one of the most relatable main characters ever, and you have a recipe that can only conclude in one of the greatest heroes of all time, Spider-Man. And today, I'm going to take a look at the comic book history of Peter Parker and put it all together in one glorious timeline. So without any further ado, let's explore the giant web of Spider-Man's history. Our story begins all the way back in 1962. You know the story from Amazing Fantasy number 15. Peter gets bitten by a spider, Uncle Ben gets shot, bing bang boom, we got a Spider-Man. And after the raging success of Spidey's first appearance, Marvel decided to run with him as their brand new superhero, giving him a ton of new villains in his first 2 years. Among these villains include major fan favorites such as the Chameleon, the Vulture, Sandman, the Lizard, and Dr. Octopus.
Doc Ock.
Genius.
What, are you looking for a raise? Get out.
But Spidey's growth didn't just come from his rogues gallery of villains. No, Spidey also had to grow within himself, finding that now famous strength that would push him into becoming an icon. You recognize this image right here? Well, it's one of the most iconic comic book panels in history, no doubt about it. Well, that panel came from a story called If This May Be My Destiny. The first of what will be many stories that we talk about during this timeline that defined Peter Parker as a character. While Aunt May falls deathly ill, Peter Parker is forced to put on the mask and defend New York from a mysterious foe called the Master Planner. Not to be confused with the nefarious Masturbator. And during this battle, there is a moment where Spidey gets trapped under a pile of rubble, completely covered in metal debris. At his lowest point so far in his short history, with all hope seemingly lost, he somehow wills himself back up by lifting the rubble off of him and stopping this menace. In just a few pages, the amazing will of Peter Parker is showcased. Truly a defining moment for an iconic character. And speaking of iconic characters, let us finally move into the third year of Spidey's existence in 1964. After he showcased that incredible determination in our previous story, his heart is tested over and over again as he meets new dangerous foes such as Electro, Mysterio, Kraven the Hunter, and the Green Goblin. Yep, Spidey's number of angry villains just grew and grew during his first few years in action. So much so that some of them decided that he needed to be dealt with once and for all in a massive superhero team-up. Kraven the Hunter, Mysterio, Vulture, Sandman, Electro, and Doc Ock all formed the first incarnation of the Sinister Six. But despite proving to be a huge challenge for him, Spidey still found himself on the winning side of this battle by defeating each member of the Sinister Six one by one. Yet, even after defeating 6 different villains at once, that still didn't stop others from challenging Spider-Man in their quest for power. In 1965, Spider-Man would have to battle new enemies such as Scorpion and Molten Man. But 1965 was also a year that featured some key allies for Peter Parker, such as his best friend Harry Osborn, the man who would later become an enemy of Peter, Miles Warren, another future enemy of Peter who becomes the Jackal in 1974, and a girl named Gwen Stacy who Peter would fall in love with over the next few years. Oh, and Mary Jane would be first mentioned in 1965 as well, before making her official debut later on in The Amazing Spider-Man number 42 with the now famous line, "Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot." And while she would debut in 1966 to completely change Peter Parker's life, Spider-Man's life would also be shaken around this time for a couple of reasons. One, because he would meet a new villain in the Rhino, and two, because of a massive reveal involving one of his arch rivals, the Green Goblin. In a story between Amazing Spider-Man issues 39 and 40, the Green Goblin finds out that Spider-Man is actually Peter Parker before the two ultimately battle each other. During the fight, Peter also discovers that Green Goblin's real identity is his best friend's father, Norman Osborn. However, Goblin ultimately loses the fight, gaining amnesia and forgetting everything about his time as the Goblin and Peter's secret identity as Spider-Man. Of course, though, he does get his memory back fairly soon after this. But now, Peter knows that Norman is the Green Goblin, a reveal that would completely change his relationship with the Osborns moving forward. However, now New York's greatest enemy is gone and there is a massive hole where the Goblin used to be. And this massive hole is ready to have a massive man fill it right up, with the Kingpin making his debut in 1967, quickly following the Shocker's debut a few months prior. And with so many villains continuously being added to his roster of enemies, you could say that Spider-Man turned into a pretty busy guy. In fact, he was so busy as Spider-Man that Peter Parker's life would completely fall apart around him. His grades are plummeting, his Aunt May gets sick, and the Daily Bugle continues to bash Spider-Man. Peter's mental and physical well-being is at an all-time low, and he does the seemingly unthinkable. In Amazing Spider-Man number 50, Peter Parker decides to quit being Spider-Man. But he doesn't stay out for long. By the end of this now iconic story, Peter Parker returns as Spider-Man because, in the end, it doesn't matter how hard it is. With great power comes great responsibility. But while Pete continues to be Spider-Man, he is reminded over the next few years just how difficult this job can be. Because after a quick introduction of the Prowler in 1969, Spider-Man would kick off the 70s with another tragedy. In Amazing Spider-Man number 90, Spidey once again battles the treacherous Doc Ock on the rooftops. Well, this fight proves to have a catastrophic ending as a piece of debris falls off toward a child. However, that child is saved by Police Captain George Stacy, the father of Peter's beloved Gwen Stacy. In that act of heroism, Captain Stacy is hit with the debris. Spider-Man pulls him away onto another rooftop to try and save him, but it's too late. After revealing that he knows the identity of Spider-Man, Captain Stacy uses his dying breath to tell him that Gwen Stacy loves Peter Parker very, very much. In this one act, Captain Stacy shows that he is a hero and that Peter will always be loved by the Stacy family. But perhaps he gave his daughter away to the wrong man. Because after Spidey had his first dealings with Hammerhead and Morbius, the most infamous Gwen Stacy story would take place in 1973. After the Green Goblin took it upon himself to kidnap Gwen, Spider-Man went on the hunt to defeat him and save the day. However, tragedy struck as, during the battle, Peter's beloved Gwen Stacy died. A story that would forever shake the comic book industry. The love interest of Spider-Man would die in this heartbreaking moment. But she wouldn't be the only major character to die around this time. In the very next issue, The Amazing Spider-Man number 122, a revenge-filled Spider-Man charges toward the Goblin and beats him within an inch of his life before ultimately choosing to stop the beatdown. However, after this act of mercy, Goblin would try to kill him in response with his own glider, but Spider-Man dodges, letting the glider impale Norman and kill him. So in the span of just a few issues, two of the most important characters in Peter's life would die during his crusade as Spider-Man. But this is the land of comic books. So after a quick first appearance by the Punisher, Spider-Man's entire world would turn completely upside down with the return of the Green Goblin. Except this time, it wasn't Norman donning the mask. No, this time it was Harry Osborn taking over the mantle that his father left behind, looking to avenge the death of Norman by defeating Spider-Man once and for all. So in the span of a few years, Peter's girlfriend dies, his best friend's dad dies, and he is almost killed by that very same best friend. So, Pete's been kinda going through a lot lately. But the good news for him is that his life gets to finally calm down as he gets a chance to refocus. Oh, wait, no it doesn't. This is Peter Parker we're talking about. It's never that easy for him. Remember Gwen Stacy? Yeah, remember how she, just died? Well, it looks like that didn't last long. Now, usually this feels like one of those stories that I would just skip in these timeline videos, considering by the end of the story, she just kinda disappears. However, with this comic starts one of the most infamous stories in Spider-Man's history, the Clone Saga. Yeah. Following Gwen Stacy's death, it would be revealed that Miles Warren, aka the Jackal, was actually in love with Gwen and would do anything to get her back. So he decided to recreate her in a lab. And just for shits and giggles, he would decide to recreate Peter Parker as well. But of course, this would ultimately be the downfall of the Jackal, as the two different Spider-Men would team up to defeat him. However, during this team up, one of the versions of Peter Parker would die while the other would continue on as the Webhead. Gwen leaves and Peter continues his life as normal. Or so we may think. But we'll get to the rest of that story in due time, because for Peter Parker, it sure is a hell of a time to be alive. And what a time indeed, as the Black Cat makes her first debut in 1979, ready to change the lives of many young boys forever. Okay, I don't care what you say, I'm gonna say it right now. Black Cat is hotter than Catwoman, okay? I know that's a controversial opinion, but I don't really give a shit, okay? She's hotter than Catwoman. If you have a different opinion, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. Have you seen Black Cat? She's got the white hair, it looks freaking sick. But we fade from one female ally to another as Madam Web is introduced the following year. She's a psychic that becomes very important to not just Spider-Man, but a whole plethora of Spidey people. Her psychic powers have been used in many stories, ranging from the saving of an innocent to multiversal catastrophic events. However, Spider-Man isn't just making allies around this time. No, he also has some pretty powerful enemies coming his way, with villains like Hydra Man raining down to wash up Spidey, Alistair Smythe who would vow to slay the Spider with his weird back tentacles and his technology, the Hobgoblin who would captivate readers for a few years until his identity is revealed to be Ned Leeds in 1987, and the Black Suit makes its first appearance in Secret Wars before fully transforming into the Venom we know today in 1988. But after all that drama, we can now settle down into a nice and lovely story. A story where Peter Parker actually doesn't have to do anything for a majority of it. Because he fucking dies. Well, sort of. In one of the more beloved Spider-Man stories in history, titled Kraven's Last Hunt, Kraven buries Spider-Man alive so that he can take his place as New York's resident wall crawler. He, dressed as the new Spider-Man, goes after the villain Vermin and locks him away in a cage. However, this new Spider-Man got a real rude awakening when Peter digs himself out of the hole and battles Kraven. By the end of the story, Kraven realizes that Spider-Man is the ultimate hunter and cannot be beaten by Kraven. So, sadly, he kills himself because there is no great hunt for him to go on anymore, and his life no longer has purpose. The biggest story in Kraven's history ends in tragedy as he ends himself once and for all. What a wonderfully beautiful and yet tragic story, one that would define Kraven as a character forever. Spider-Man stories are so simple, so lovely, and so uncomplicated, right? I wonder what other fun stories I have to talk about during this timeline as we head into the 1990s. Okay, the 90s. We all love the 90s, right? Let's see what's going on. Let's see. It says here, the Clone Saga. Fuck! So after the brief introduction of Tombstone in 1988 and Carnage in 1992, I guess we have to talk about the Clone Saga. Okay, I don't really know where to start with all of this. It's pretty hard to explain this whole Clone Saga thing. So, do you remember when the Jackal cloned Peter Parker a few minutes ago and that clone of Peter Parker died? Well, that clone of Peter, turns out, is actually still alive and living under the name Ben Reilly. And when this Ben Reilly character returned, he revealed that he was the real Peter Parker the whole time, while the Peter Parker we've been following since that event is the one that was cloned by the Jackal, which in hindsight actually doesn't really make that big of a difference. However, during this time, that clone Peter that we've been following has grown up, gotten married, and was recently told that MJ is pregnant with his child. So Peter decided to retire and leave Ben Reilly as the new Spider-Man, as the clone Peter gets to ride off into the sunset alongside MJ. which actually sounds kind of interesting if you ask me. But then there's just... Okay, Aunt May temporarily died, MJ had a miscarriage, and at one point there was a ton of clones, and this whole story just became one huge mess of who's the real Peter, and tragedy, and just weirdness going on. And the whole thing lasted way too long. I'll get to the real life reasoning behind this whole mess in a few moments, but in the comic world, after nearly 2 years of this nonsense, we still had a lot of questions. When the hell is this story going to end? Who exactly is behind this huge mess in Peter's life? And who would have the money, the resources, and the motivation to cause all of this confusion? Well, that would be the once thought dead Norman Osborn, who is revealed to still be alive and to be the mastermind behind this whole Clone Saga mess. He did this essentially just to mess with Peter. He wanted him to question his sense of self and basically make Peter question everything he's ever known, just like how Norman went through the same thing after getting amnesia all the way back in the beginning of their rivalry. And, yeah, it's kinda dumb. But why did Marvel create this stupid and overcomplicated saga in the first place? Well, to keep it brief, Marvel wanted to bring Peter's character back to his roots. At the time, the writers of Spider-Man had accidentally made Peter too unrelatable for children by giving him a more adult lifestyle. Peter was a full-on adult around this time, with responsibilities and a wife and an expected child on the way. So everybody at Marvel decided to brainstorm a few possibilities as to how to bring Peter Parker back to his more child-friendly and whimsical roots. And this is where the idea of bringing back the clone came in. However, during this story, there was a lot of weird drama going on at Marvel at the time that caused the lead editor position for Spidey Comics to change over and over again during the process of the Clone Saga, which turned this pretty clever story that would last about 6 months into an overcomplicated mess that would span over 2 years. And in the end of this whole thing, the Ben Reilly twist of him being the real Peter Parker didn't even matter. Since by the end of the story, Norman just revealed that Ben Reilly is in fact the clone, and Peter Parker, the one that we've been following all these years, is still the real Peter Parker. So this whole Clone Saga thing ended up being completely pointless other than to undo one of the greatest deaths in comic history with Norman Osborn. Oh, and its existence also proves to annoy dumb nerds like me who decide to go through the entire history of Spider-Man and try to make some sense out of this Clone Saga bullshit. I really hate the Clone Saga. But hey, at least they figured out who Spider-Man was before deciding to unmask him during the Civil War event in 2007. Which, of course, leads to another very divisive story in One More Day. After Peter's unmasking during the Civil War, the Kingpin decided to put a hit out on the Parker household. But when Kingpin's hired sniper went to shoot, he ended up accidentally shooting Aunt May. The surrogate mother of Peter Parker was put into a coma, and Pete just couldn't take it. So instead of letting this very crippled old lady finally pass away, Peter decided to make a literal deal with the devil himself. The demon Mephisto offered to save Aunt May and make everyone forget that Peter is Spider-Man in exchange for Peter and MJ's marriage, which in turn would make it so their daughter never existed. And Peter accepted, ultimately deciding that his family would always be in danger if the rest of the world remembered that he was Spider-Man. Peter decided to trade his marriage and the life of his daughter for the safety of May and MJ, which, I mean, is pretty fucked up. I'm just the messenger, and I feel bad just relaying that information to you. I can't imagine what it would have been like for the writers at the time. But after all that drama, Peter is finally back and fully established as Spider-Man. After everything that happened with the Civil War, with Mephisto, with the Clone Saga, with all of that nonsense, Peter Parker is finally back. Which means only one thing. Let's get rid of him for a while. In our final major story of the video, let us talk about the time when Spider-Man went superior. During a battle with the Hobgoblin, Spider-Man was unsuspectedly pinched by one of Doc Ock's Octobots. This Octobot was programmed to swap the consciousness between the two, causing Peter to become trapped in the dying body of Otto Octavius, with Otto taking over the vessel of Peter Parker. Doc Ock takes over his body and identity as Peter Parker. As Peter dies in the body of Otto, it's Doc Ock who gets to live a longer life in the vessel of his archenemy. And, similarly to Kraven from Kraven's Last Hunt, Otto decided to take over Peter's role as Spider-Man, looking to prove that he is a better hero than Peter ever could have been. But there's a catch. Even though Otto took over the body of Peter Parker, there is still a little piece of Peter trapped in there as well, able to talk to Otto from the back of his head. Sure, Otto has primary control of everything, but he can still hear Peter's heroic voice of reason second-guessing all of his decisions. However, that's not going to stop Otto on his quest to prove that he is the superior Spider-Man. And, well, he did make a pretty convincing case as to why he's a better Spider-Man than Peter Parker. Otto defeated the Sinister Six, blinded the Vulture, killed the mass murderer known as Massacre, and invented these things called Spider-Bots that would patrol the city, thereby getting to crimes that Peter wouldn't be able to as a single man. Hell, Otto even proved to be a better Peter Parker as well. Without the insecurities of Peter Parker, Otto would use this hyper-intelligent mind of his to start his own successful tech company, Parker Industries. And during this time at Parker Industries, Otto would meet and fall in love with a woman named Anna Maria Marconi. She'll be more important in a little bit, just keep that name in the back of your head. Oh, and he would also take part in a little story that you might not have heard of before, involving the Spider-Verse. After being transported to the year 2099, the Superior Spider-Man would find himself being hunted by a mysterious threat targeting spider people from all across the multiverse. So Superior Spider-Man went around the multiverse to build up an army. We've got Spider-Men, Spider-Women, and even Spider-Pigs all ready to take on the multiversal threats of Morlun, Karn, and the rest of the Inheritors. The multiverse was broken wide open and has now become a major part of modern Spider-Man stories like the Into the Spider-Verse movie. However, this Doc Ock Spider-Man can't just bounce around the multiverse forever, so he does eventually return to his universe to take on the biggest threat he's ever faced. And who might this big threat be? Why, of course, it all circles back to the Green Goblin. And he didn't just come in as simply another bad guy for the Superior Spider-Man. No, he tore down every single wall of protection that Doc Ock had created. The Spider-Bots hacked so nobody could use them. The protective measures at Parker Industries tore down. Hell, he even hacked the Superior Spider-Man suit, so all these little upgrades that Otto added were worthless. Goblin also went out of his way to build highly advanced spider slayers to try and take down his enemy. But then, he did the one thing that would completely change Doc Ock's life forever. The woman that Otto loved, Anna Maria Marconi, was kidnapped by the Green Goblin. And after everything Green Goblin threw at him, Otto realized that he truly was not worthy enough to be Spider-Man. He was thrown so many obstacles, and in the end, he still couldn't protect the one woman he loved. So, he gave Peter his body back. Peter is the only one that can stop the Goblin and save his precious Anna. But in giving Peter back his body, Otto had to sacrifice himself and his consciousness. And thus, Otto Octavius died so Peter Parker can save everyone. And after that major sacrifice, Peter Parker returns as Spider-Man and defeats the Green Goblin. In the story, Peter proved that even with all of this technology, even with all of these protective measures, Otto still didn't fully grasp what it took to be Spider-Man. Peter's will and drive to give everything that he has to protect the ones that he cares about, that is what makes him Spider-Man. And with that lesson, I think that this is the perfect time to conclude our Spider-Man timeline. From the bright teenager who took on colorful villains, to the heartbroken boy grieving over his love, to the introspective man who proved what makes a hero, Spider-Man's 60-plus year history has been a long and winding road. This always troubled and insecure boy has inspired millions upon millions of people and has proven to everyone what makes a hero. It's not just about these fancy superpowers. No, it's about the one lesson that should be ingrained in every decent person. With great power comes... Thank you all so much for watching this video. I want to know, what are your favorite Spider-Man moments over the past 60 years of his existence? And what other characters would you like to see an Ultimate Timeline video on? Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. But until next time, have a good day. Bye-bye.